My name is Sunny. Welcome to the Render Network. This is a first in a series of interviews with artists that actually use the Render Network. The Render Network, of course, is the world's first decentralized GPU rendering platform designed for artists to take advantage of idle GPU compute power from across the world so that they can render their work quicker and cheaper than other options that are available. There's a lot more to the Render Network, so if you want to find out more about it, visit rendernetwork.com. And if you want to find out about the foundation, we do things like grants, which are pretty good. You get literally free rendering on the Render Network. I mean, you just need a 500-word pitch, and that's kind of it. Submit a pitch, and you can get rendering for absolutely free. So it is my absolute pleasure to welcome our guest for this show, Rafael Rao.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Now, would you like to give yourself an introduction? I would probably do you a disservice, so I'll leave it to you.
Yes. So, I am not good at introductions, so
okay.
Take it as what it is. So, I'm Rafael Rau. I'm a 3D artist based in Ludwigsburg, Germany. I do specialize in photorealistic CGI. So basically the physics of light and materials, and this is what I've done most of my life. I come from a graphic design and photography background, so this is what I basically studied. I didn't study it, it's like something in between school and university. I'm not sure about the name, but you probably know what I mean by my description. And yeah, that's what I do. I'm doing tutorials also. This is something more recent, so maybe you know me from that. I'm doing tutorials about Octane and Cinema 4D mostly, but also Blender on YouTube.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That was a brilliant introduction.
Thank you.
Now, I've got to say, you are absolutely revered in the Cinema 4D community, the Octane community, and I think the 3D community in general. Everyone loves seeing the tutorials that you do. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't know how many people there are that watch my tutorials, but I noticed that there must be quite a huge amount of Octane users doing them because, the viewing numbers, because like it's a very niche thing to be doing. Doing 3D is niche. Doing 3D with a certain amount of software packages, for example, Cinema 4D, and then actually going for a very certain renderer, like it makes the user base smaller and smaller every time I go one level deeper. So for that nichiness of the channel, I actually get a lot of views per video, I guess. So yeah, there must be a lot of people who watch that and find that interesting, hopefully. If you have suggestions of making the channel better and have suggestions of topics that I could use, I'm always open for that. So, and actually, like maybe by going off topic here a little bit.
I love going off topic.
It's just a small tangent. So what I wanted to say is just that most of my tutorials in some way originate from suggestions that came in whatever way. So people suggesting me stuff, giving me ideas, and then I trying them out and think, oh, that might be a good tutorial. That's how a lot of those happened.
Yeah. I think that's often one of the best ways of making content because it kind of writes itself. You know, people are asking for things and then you know what people are asking for.
Yeah, I think so. And like sometimes I'm more spontaneous than I want to. Like I know other YouTube channels, they have schedules and planned ahead for weeks what they will publish. But for me, sometimes it's like a day before I do the tutorial, I don't know the topic of it. And like at some points I know the topic. For example, I know the topics of my next 2 videos right now. Next week will be a collaboration. Hopefully the audience will like it. and the week after that is my second part of the displacement tutorial that I started this week. So I already know what I have to do, and it gives me a little bit of relief when I do. And it stresses me out, of course, if I don't, if I go and want to prepare a tutorial which I don't know the topic of. So yeah, it all, like, I had the feeling that in the summertime my brain went into a lump and I couldn't figure out what to do next. So this is like, I also missed 2 weeks of tutorials.
2 weeks.
By the way, I never said that I do weekly tutorials, but I try to keep them up and at least do bi-weekly. But yeah, last time was like so the tutorial before the 100th episode, which was last week, there were 2 weeks where I didn't post anything. So I felt really bad about that.
But you made up for it, right?
Hopefully. People have to judge me or judge the content and see if that holds true.
I mean, whenever we see any of your posts, your tutorials and images that you share, we absolutely, retweet them, we share them, and I think it's very inspiring. And wasn't it like a couple of months ago now that you did a photorealistic, I think it was a Raspberry Pi, right?
Oh yeah, it was a Raspberry Pi, I think.
And that went absolutely viral, didn't it?
Yeah, that was astonishing. So I've seen videos like that where people were taking 3D assets and then recreating them in sort of a way that it looks like you have filmed them with a cell phone camera. And I thought, why don't I do something like that on my own and see how it goes? And as you just said, it went very well in terms of
Very
viewership
well.
and likes and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And it was actually the first feature for me on level
Yeah.
80. So they feature a lot of CGI stuff. And like, I always wanted to be featured there, and I was a little bit of what's it called, jealous of other artists that were featured there. So yeah, I finally got
That's
my
cool.
feature there as well.
And now those artists are all jealous of you.
Yeah, I always say that people needn't to be jealous of other people because
Yeah,
like, it's
absolutely.
all a flow, and you, like, of course I'm concentrating on something and I have my goals and stuff like that, but you never know what other people did and like what they sacrificed basically to get to the point they are, to get the feature, for example, or anything else you're jealous of. So yeah, it's like we are all in different stages of our life and of what we are doing, what we are chasing in our lives. So like, there's no
Yeah,
comparison,
absolutely.
I guess. But yeah, I'm guilty of that as well, being jealous of other people's successes. So I'm just human too.
We're all human. And as you say, everyone's on their own path and everyone is learning at their own stage. People at the beginning of their 3D journey are still trying to find their feet,
Yeah,
and others
definitely.
are, learning from people like yourself.
Yeah, and that like goes for me too. I'm also learning all the time. Like, this morning I had another suggestion on my Patreon from someone who had seen a YouTube video about compositing, and they suggested me watching the video and see if I could translate that from Blender cycles to Octane. And I actually watched the video and I learned something new from the video, and that's something great that I like always. If you're open, if you don't have the idea set in your mind that you already know everything, which is always a bad idea, you can like stumble upon something due to circumstances that you never would have expected before, and then find a new video that you click because you think, oh, maybe it's a good suggestion, and then you learn something actually from the video, and that's a great thing.
Yeah.
I unfortunately don't know the title of the video now, if you have show notes, maybe we can link it there.
You mentioned your Patreon. So what's the address for people to actually follow you there?
As I don't do interviews very often, I have to lie and say it's Patreon/Silverwing minus VFX. It might not be, but I could look it up. But yeah, I think
I'll take a look. And with the beauty of editing, it's right here.
Great.
So how did you first get into the world of visual effects and 3D art?
Right. So first of all, like, I'm just a small artist. Maybe I'm understating a little bit, but I think it's good for people to know that I'm not this big studio throwing out works left and right. So I'm just a small freelance artist doing my work from a shared office. I have a shared office with a colleague of mine who is doing the same thing as I do. Basically 3D artists doing jobs for visualization industries and stuff like that. So yeah, where was I going with that? So yeah, basically I'm what I was saying is I'm not a big studio, and I'm also not that much into VFX. So despite my name, like this is one of the this is one of the things where the name came first, because I thought at the time that I was going to do a lot of VFX. And then later on it turned out I'm much more a guy for full CG videos, or like no like real camera footage integration and stuff like that. So I'm doing 3D most of the time, and only 3D. But anyway, so just clearing stuff up so people don't have false expectations. But yeah, the start of my interest probably came in with, as with so many of those peoples with movies, watching movies and seeing the incredible VFX there. That's where VFX played a role in my career. So watching, of course, as always, the old Star Wars films, many people name those for their starting in their career. Like, I watched those not in the cinema because I wasn't born there yet, but I watched those on VHS back then. So, and then later on, a big push for like going into photorealism and stuff like that was The Matrix. Actually, I already experimented with like still images back then, when The Matrix came out in cinemas. I think it was 1999. And yeah, it was a big push for me to think, well, look at the worlds you can open with CGI and with like good storytelling and everything put together very well. And I guess somewhere around this time also my name came to be, and I was thinking that I would go more in the VFX kind of direction. So
yeah, so The Matrix, I watched that at cinema as well. And yeah, it was 1999, and it was absolutely revolutionary at the time. The VFX was amazing. The CGI, it was
true.
It was like the next level of cinema.
There's a very funny story connected to that I probably never told anybody. So this might be a first. I'm not really sure, but the first time I actually saw The Matrix was in Spanish, and it was on Mallorca in a Spanish cinema.
Wow.
And you need to know that I don't speak any Spanish. So at some point, I was visiting a school friend where the family moved to Mallorca later on. And I was around maybe 16 by the time, maybe 15. Like, I was underage for The Matrix, I know that much. And The Matrix was, I think, had an age restriction of 16 back then. So we went into a cinema because we didn't know what to do with our time. And we watched, I think it was Universal Soldier or anything at the time that came out in cinemas. And then
Yeah, Universal Soldier is an 18.
yeah, maybe, I don't know. We like the restriction or the controls were very lax. And I think the father from my friend even moved us into the cinema. He was in on the
okay.
plan to let us see this movie. Why ever he decided to do that, but I think he was at the counter and said, yeah, it's fine if the kids watch this movie. And they let us in. So after, like, the movie's runtime wasn't really long. I think it was 1.5 hours or something like that. And we weren't really sure what to do next. So my friend had this idea to snuck into another room of the cinema, not checking out and back in, not paying for the ticket.
Sneaky.
So we just went to a random room and waited for the presentation to begin. And it turned out to be The Matrix.
Oh, that's a happy coincidence then.
So I didn't understand a thing. I didn't like The Matrix is very hard to understand even if you are on the language that you're watching. And I was watching it in a language that I didn't understand, but what I could take in were the visuals, and they were stunning enough that I wasn't bored at all. And yeah, that's the first time I watched The Matrix.
That's such a good experience.
Yeah.
And that's an exclusive here. You never told anyone before.
And of course, I more than made up for it later on with ticket sales, because when I got back to Germany, I must have watched it 2 or 3 times in Cinema 4D. In Cinema 4, sorry, that's a Freudian slip here. In Cinema, when I came home, and then I bought it on VHS, and then I bought it on Blu-ray later on DVD. Yeah. Then I bought it on Blu-ray, and now I bought it on 4K Blu-ray. Yeah. So I think the debt is paid here.
I think so too. I enjoyed that story.
Some random facts there.
So The Matrix really inspired you to get into 3D.
It was part of it, yes.
So what inspired you to focus on photorealism?
I think that has to be a mixture of some different topics. So one of those might have been like in the early days when there was no internet, I would go to the library from time to time. And because I'm not much of a reader, I look at pictures quite often, and I found the books of old masters. So basically oil painting from the Greeks and like old masters. Yeah, Raphael, for example. And like I was mesmerized at the detail they could produce with and the depth of the pictures they could produce with their brush strokes on the canvas. Yeah. And I think part of that, of the photorealism, or maybe let's call it hyperrealism in this sense, comes from there. But also, I think back in the day, when it came to 3D, photorealism was some kind of benchmark also. So it was a kind of competition between artists. So artists would produce a render and they would push themselves to get more realistic and more realistic, because this is like a benchmark to that has a good universal foundation to beat. Like it wouldn't be a good foundation to beat, like, I don't know, how realistic you can get. Like I said it again, how realistic, but how artistic you can get hair, for example, because artistic it doesn't have a foundation, so it doesn't have something you can compare it to. So I think that's where the race to photorealism emerged, and this was right around the time I got into 3D, And so I was really really drawn into that kind of topic, and I took it on, of course, and tried to beat the other artists that were racing the same race as well. So yeah, that's probably one of the other factors that got me into photorealism. And then maybe a third thing would be the love for physics, maybe. So because I always find it fascinating how light behaves, how material behaves, what phenomenon you can observe in reality. But maybe I'm mixing up stuff. Maybe that came later, because when you are about photorealism or when you are about competition, you of course try to look up the factors that you that makes up a photorealistic image. So, but I know even in my childhood, I was playing around with prisms, for example, and with like different things that make light interesting. For example, I know that I was always fascinated by glasses that were casting caustics across the dinner table when the sun would shine into the room and stuff like that. So I was further on fascinated that I learned that this could be replicated on in a computer. And basically back then it wasn't very perfect, but this is also what blows my mind, really slightly off topic again, but how far we have come from like within one lifetime. If you go back maybe 200 or 300 years and then get a slice of time between 300 and 350 years ago and look at the progress there. There's not a lot of progress happening. But in the last 50 years here, there's so much progress happening, like all over the place. We've gone from like very crude image graphics that you can see in older movies, like in Star Wars, like if the X-Wing goes to the Death Star and flies into the path to deliver its payload, then like this was very like, I don't know, 5 frames a second computer graphics that were displayed on the display from Luke's X-Wing. And right now you can do so much more with computer graphics, and it was like not that long ago. And really that blows my mind. So yeah, that ends the off topic here.
That's super crazy to think about. It really is. We have progressed a ridiculous amount. I mean, I remember when Terminator 2 came out, right? That was like the pinnacle of graphics. Seeing the T-1000 come out of the fire, just walk out of the fire. I think that was like, that was done on, silicon graphics machines. It was like, wow, this is incredible. Absolutely incredible. True. Now we can do that, like anybody can do that.
Yeah, we probably could do that same scene in real time.
Yeah.
On a computer without any real footage or something like that. And it would look probably very realistic. Not quite maybe like film, but like, if you look at games nowadays that run in real time, it's really astonishing also how this is possible. Of course, it takes a lot of energy. Like if you measure the wattage on your computer while gaming, it increased a lot in the last couple of years. But we can do a lot of stuff with that.
It does take a lot of power.
Yeah, it's very true. It's funny, the first processors in computer didn't have any dedicated cooling on it. They were like, it was enough to have like a metal surface to spread the heat into the case. and nowadays you like, maybe it wasn't even a metal surface, but some surface, and nowadays you have like very specialized dedicated cooling solutions to get the heat that the thing produces into the environment.
It's to get the absolute most out of those chips, isn't it? And it is difficult because the room that I'm recording in now, I've got my PC on and my Mac, and the PC's got 2 GPUs in it. And the heat from this, it's in a few minutes, this is going to build up.
Do you have to have a warm weather period right now in the UK?
Yeah, in the UK, it's actually kind of cold right now. Summer has absolutely finished,
Okay.
and autumn is very cold now.
Okay, that's cool.
It's still meant to be summer, but,
No, I have the same here. Like, I have a couple of GPUs standing around here too, and I render on them, of course, from time to time. Also, I'm a node operator, as you call them, for the render network. So I'm on the other side. And so those GPUs are rendering for people on the cloud, basically, when I'm not doing anything on them. So yeah, that's what I do, and this is also producing a lot of heat. So right now we also have a cooler period, and we are coming from a very hot period, so above 30 degrees for a week last week.
It's very warm.
And yeah, it's like very, very hot in here when that happens.
I can imagine. So which GPUs are you running on your nodes?
I have 3 nodes, but I keep incrementing, so to speak. So whenever there's a new generation of graphic cards coming out, I use the new ones on a new node, and I just leave the old ones running, more or less. So in my recent node that I'm recording this right now and filming that, I am running a 4090 and 3 3090s. So 4 cards in overall. Yeah, so I have like a Thunderbolt card in there. So 2 of those are in external enclosures because it's very hard to get 4 of those big boys inside one of the computers.
Huge now. Absolutely huge. And the power requirements as well.
Yeah, also the power requirements, yeah.
So how has access to the Render Network's decentralized rendering capabilities impacted your workflow?
Yeah, that's a good question. So since we talked about the workstation before and all the compute power that I have here, I think I have a really good setup to also explore like vast amounts of compute here, but still I use the Render Network. So for example, actually very recently, like on Friday, I decided to, I have sort of a show package where like the separation between clips is interrupted by the letters SLV that flying around. So sort of like the old Batman logo, something like that. Maybe some of you people know. And then I had the 100th episode where I rendered the 100 instead of the SLV to be my graphics there. And I did that in a little bit kind of a different color. And I liked actually the color better than what I was using before. So on Friday, I decided to do the SLV to an update to that and update the color on that. And it's like translucent letters that can render quite long. So even on my powerful system, it renders about 3 to 4 minutes a frame, and there are 300 frames. So I thought, okay, this will take all night, and then in the morning when I come in and do the tutorial preparation, I come into a very hot office, and that affects my concentration capability. So I thought, why not send it to the Render Network and let it render there? Probably you have it back in a couple of minutes, if not hours, or hours if not minutes, basically that other way around. And do it there, and it will cost like, I don't know, €70 or something like that. So yeah, I actually did that there, and I got it back, and I could just edit it and be done with it, instead of like monitoring my rendering here and take care that my graphic cards that needs its pads to replace, not to overheat and stuff like that. So that's a benefit for that.
What some people may not be aware of is that other render engines are planned to come to the render network. So for example, we have Blender Cycles, which is in development, and also Redshift. So Redshift is currently in beta, and it works absolutely amazingly. What do you think about that?
I think that's a fascinating and good choice of an addition, because with Blender increasing in user base, I think, and also a lot of people that use Blender will use the render engine that comes with it, and then having a possibility to render on the network reliably for rather cheap, I think that will persuade a lot of people to use the render network there that come from Blender. I think we are going to notice that definitely as node operators as well, by the amount of jobs that will come into the network. Like Dino asked me if I would be interested in using Redshift on the network, and then I said to him, I barely use Redshift for like final rendering. Whenever I do a project myself, I use Octane, and then I of course use Octane for rendering. So the only times I use Redshift, I don't want to talk down Redshift. It's also a very capable render engine that a lot of users use. But I only use it if I do a client project and they require me to use Redshift on the client project. I can also work with it. I can gain photorealistic results with it. And it's also a good render engine. I just like Octane a little bit more. And it's like the difference between a path tracer and just I don't know what you would call Redshift, ray tracer maybe. There's a small distinction, because like I like the approach from Octane when you turn on rendering, and this is like similar to almost all path tracers. Like they have everything turned on from the start. So when you do something, when you create an interior with plants in it and give it the right materials, then you get GI, then you get subsurface scattering or translucency in the leaves of the plant's leaves and stuff like that. So everything is there from the start, and everything like fits in quite well. And for let's say, even if it's wrong, the term ray tracer, like I count V-Ray, for example, among those as well. So ray tracers, they have sort of everything turned off at the beginning. So when you go and make a project there, you have to turn on GI, you have to turn on subsurface scattering, you have to turn on I don't know, anti-aliasing and stuff like that. So you build from the foundation up, and with path tracers you basically are given a whole package that you can use. Of course, it's just a couple of settings and you can get really equal results, but yeah, that's like what I really like, that you don't have to think about like tweaking your render settings. You just turn on path tracing and you're good to go, basically.
Yeah, so when I first started using Octane, it was hugely different to the other render engines that I was used to. So I used V-Ray quite extensively. You know, V-Ray for C4D.
Yeah, me too.
Right? That's when that first came out. And it was, you know, I don't want to badmouth it, but it was quite a headache to use it. Like, mainly for architectural visualizations. You know, it was a nightmare at the best of times. All the pre-caching and everything else,
yes.
Right? It was, and with Octane, it was like, wait a minute, I can just render this?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was a long time V-Ray user, I jumped on it when it came out. I think it was version 0.6 or something like that for Cinema 4D. There's also always a discrepancy between the V-Ray Core and the Cinema 4D version. So I think it was V-Ray Core 1 point something and Cinema 4D version 0.6 or something like that. And like I liked it because it was faster and was giving me more realistic results than I would have gotten through Cinema 4D. Back then in Cinema 4D, the GI was called Radiosity, and it was dead slow. It was like you could render like one frame without it, and it would render in 3 minutes, then turn it on, and it would render 2 hours or something like that. And then like you would render that, and then you would notice there were artifacts anywhere. Everywhere, sorry. There were artifacts everywhere. So, and like there was a sort of brute force, like as you had in V-Ray 2, but this was even slower. Like you could render overnight if you ticked brute force on in Cinema 4D back then. It was like not usable at all. So yeah, I went on V-Ray. And as I am an expert in Octane now, I was in V-Ray back then. And like in the 100th episode of my tutorial series, I opened the old V-Ray again, and my brain almost forgot all about it. I wasn't even sure how to set settings anymore. So it's like very adaptive to the current software that you're using.
So, have you used the Cinema 4D wizard?
Not yet. I'm so used to exporting to Orbix that I actually never used it, because like there have been made also huge advantages in the way that you can export to Orbix. I know the time when you hit export and it would take half an hour, and nowadays you just hit export and it takes like what's a normal scene, but for a scene that I would usually use, it takes like 2 minutes or something like that, and it would then be exported. So yeah, I'm just used to the workflow, but I'm curious to use the new wizard to experience that as well.
Yeah, so I used the wizard very recently. It is good. It packages everything, checks the files, and it even opens up the browser so that you can just upload your file. It is really good. It's going to simplify things for a lot of people.
I think that's a really good thing, because I think that's might be some kind of hurdle. I at least heard people say, oh, yeah, you then have to export as Orbix, and you have to open that in the standalone and check if everything works out. Nowadays, I find very little that doesn't work. And if I do find something, I report it, and it's fixed very, very soon. So like it's basically immediately fixed. So I can, like within the next Octane version, it then works. But back in the day, it was like a lot more stuff had to be figured out, and it was a lot of back and forth. And of course, this is tedious. And if people expect stuff just to work, especially if you're on a short deadline and need stuff to work, then I think this is where the wizard comes in really handy. That's like just does everything for you. And this is like in line with tools that other render farms also have.
So far, the feedback has been brilliant. It's been amazing.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah, I was really surprised when it came out that like the team took the effort to actually integrate it that deeply. And I actually shared it on my Twitter, because of course it's a good thing that should be shared, because why not make it easier for people to use like to get their renders done, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the new technologies and techniques that you're excited to explore with your work?
That's an interesting question. I have to think about that myself, because I see AI with a crying eye and with a laughing eye. So I think like this is a huge controversy right now, like AI and what you can do with it, whether it's good for us, whether it's not.
Yeah.
I think it's something in between, because right now I think it's mostly hype that was generated with it. And I get interested when it really finds its way into the software and really helps me to achieve something as an artist. Example would be, although I really like Risem UV to do my UV work, it would be even better if I could just send it to AI and it would figure out the way I would do it and then do it for me, for example, like that. So I can just get my UVs the way, the inner cleanliness that I wanted to with one click, and all in the background. It's just AI that analyzed maybe what I've done before to my UVs and then just figure out how I work and then applies it to other models that I would like to UV, for example. Or like another example, right now, like let's go for a longer walk here. Right now, artists, and that makes it very easy for them, are used to using assets. Like assets became a real huge thing in the last couple of years, and it's a good thing to have assets, but sometimes you need a little bit more accurate stuff to your what you have in your mind, either to get your vision represented more closely, or that you have the control of the full quality of the asset. And this needs modeling, of course. So you model your object and then texture it and then do the rendering with it. And I do a lot of modeling in SDS still. It's like a very old technique that's basically developed by, I don't know, probably Pixar, I guess. And so you can round off corners and like have a good workflow with your mesh, and you can change stuff later on and stuff like that. And I really like the SDS modeling technique because it gives you some advantages as edge flows that you can select for easy UV unwrapping, for example. But the disadvantage here is it takes so much time to model. So I did my Game Boy model, like almost all my models I do in SDS, especially for my spare time projects. And I think it took me 2 weeks to just model the front and the back part of the Game Boy because it's so detailed, it has so much structure in it. Whereas if you do a CAD model, you can probably do it in 1 day. You can get the whole Game Boy front and back whole in 1 day with CAD modeling. So coming back to AI, what I really would love if I could feed the AI the CAD model that has usually rather bad topology, and then it would model a SDS model out of that with the structure and cleanliness that I usually model my model. And when tools like that come into software that help me as an artist, save time, but don't distract me with my workflow. So what I don't like about AI is like the whole image generation things to the most part. It can also help, and I don't say it's the devil or something like that, like other artists do, and I can understand them as well, of course. But you don't have control right now over the image that's generated in a kind of manner that I want to.
Yeah, I think it's that granular control. I think because you know your tools inside and out, because you've been in your specialist field for quite some time, it's difficult to try to envisage different tools that may appear.
Right. I also don't want to be the guy, so there's this thing from Jurassic Park where digital effects for the first time took over in the film industry, and before that most of that was done with models. And there were some model makers that denied the fact that the visual effects done in a computer were looking more fluid and looking more lifelike than the model effects back then. So I don't want to become the guy that is stuck into like basically offline rendering, if you want to call it like this, and don't want to move on to anything that would actually benefit my creativity. So I'm hoping that I can make the jump or like continuing on my path if the occasion arises, basically.
Yeah, it's always good to be open to new ways of working and optimizing your own workflow. I think that's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, I guess. So optimizing the workflow, but also like I have the tendency also, like this comes with experience. The more experienced you are, the more you know how things should be done, the perfect way or the more perfect way that things should be done. And then there's a danger to lose yourself in the details. And I think I am always on the edge to do that. Because like who else would put 2 weeks of work in modeling a front and a back side of a Game Boy?
That's true.
Like, and like I managed to basically redeem from that by finishing the animation. But if you burn yourself out by doing like tedious tasks that can be done otherwise in a more efficient way, why do it in the first place, basically? So it's always a struggle to find the right path, I think.
So, Raphael, how do our viewers get to know you even better? How do they see your work? What's your website?
My website is silverwing-vfx.de. I think there's a .com also, but I barely use it. It's like the same site, just linked through a different domain. And then on Twitter, I think I am at Raphael Rau, but that's why I said I would have to write it down beforehand. Hopefully you can insert that on the screen.
I'll put it right here.
Yeah. Basically on Twitter, I post smaller stuff and also my new tutorials when they come out. Then I'm also on Instagram. I don't know my handle on Instagram at all. It might be SilverwingVFX or it might be Raphael Rau. I don't know.
So one thing I want to mention to our viewers is that we have grants available. All you need to do is go to renderfoundation.com/grants and you submit a 500-word proposal to what your project is, what it is you want to do. So take a look at that. Take a look at it. Here is the link. It's super easy to do.
I think that's also something for me because I haven't yet. Yeah,
exactly. It's free rendering on the Render Network.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, that sounds amazing, actually.
Raphael, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for conducting the interview. Always a pleasure doing those.
No problem at all.
And yeah, thank you.
And I'm sure we will absolutely have you on again another time.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm happy to be back.
Right. Take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye.